Welcome back to the WKAN Morning Show, 55 degrees right here in Kankakee. And speaking of being right here in Kankakee, Thursday night we welcome some guests to the Kankakee Public Library and welcome them to our community as well. A couple of Chicago radio legends, Steve and Johnny, will be joining us at the Kankakee Public Library and joining us right now on the radio as well. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning, Bill.
It is an honor to be joined by Steve King and Johnnie Putnam, who, as being a little bit of a radio geek myself, your show always was just the right time for me to, as you know, somebody who's doing a morning program to listen to before I came to the radio. So it's a real treat to be able to connect with both of you, and honored that you're coming to our community to talk about a true legend in Les Paul, and coming to Kankakee on Thursday evening. And tell us, Steve, how did this connection with Les Paul develop over the years?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get the chance to interview Les back in 1990, and I was about as nervous as I could be.
Oh, I could imagine.
Well, as a guitar player especially, because this was a guy, he grew up, wanting a Les Paul guitar and imagining someday that he would actually see him perform, much less talk to him.
And I was just blown away the first time that I talked to him. He was just as nice as he could be, and then it developed into a friendship. Johnny and I started talking to him on a regular basis. And
on and off the air.
He would join us, we wound up, for 18 years, we had Les on the show, and we developed just a really close friendship with him. And as you know, we just recently wrote a book called A Little More Les, talking about it has some of the interviews and some backstage photos and stories of the time that we were fortunate to spend with Les.
We actually have over 60 hours of interviews with Les. That's
amazing.
A lot of talking, Bill.
It is a lot of talking. Now, every once in a while, do you have to kind of pinch yourself as you're going through these 18 years that this is the guy that you, this is the person that you wanted the guitar, you idolized, and now he's your friend.
Well, and the cool thing, too, Bill, is when I was listening to the interviews, because we did listen to the interviews to decide which interviews we would include in the book, and I would hear myself when Les would say, so when Judy and I got off the plane, and I said to Les, now, Judy, what Judy? And he said, Judy Garland, doll. I'm talking Judy. And I would go, oh, my gosh. I'd get excited about the people he hung out with.
Well, speaking of that, you talk about pinch me moments. There was a time when we were with Les down in Nashville at the Ryman Auditorium. It was for an all-star guitar night tribute to Les. And we're back in Les's dressing room with him, and there's a knock at the door. And somebody says, Scotty's here. Scotty who? Scotty Moore, Elvis Presley's original guitar player, the guitar player that you see with Elvis on the Ed Sullivan shows. And I was like in guitar geek heaven. Les Paul, Scotty Moore, okay, I can die now.
In a small room, no less. So he got to hear everything that they were saying to each other, which was really very cool. And we have pictures from that night backstage with Les. And so the book is not just transcribed interviews. It's our experiences with him off the air as well as on the air.
And for people who... okay, they're fans of music, and they've heard of this name because it's on guitars. But describe to us just what a big innovator Les Paul was in the world of music.
Well, along with being one of the pioneers in the development of the solid body electric guitar, Les basically, most of the things that the average kid is able to take home and record himself on wouldn't have happened without Les Paul pioneering it. He pioneered multi-track recording, reverb, close miking, all kinds of effects that people take for granted right now. Those were Les Paul's toys. He invented them.
Wow.
In fact, at his funeral, a number of musicians stood up and they all agreed that he would never be forgotten because not only do they continue playing Les Paul guitars, but every time you play music, if you really think about it, you wouldn't be playing the music the way it is today if it hadn't been for the things that he invented.
And what I find really, as I've read more about this, is that sometimes if somebody is a genius, somebody is an innovator, they're kind of, maybe not personable, or they're kind of off in their own world. And not the case at all with Les Paul.
You are so right. He was such a people person. I mean, when he performed at the Club Iridium, and he did up until he was 94 years old, he was doing 2 shows on a Monday night. They would actually be flicking the lights in the club at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, Les, we want to go home. Because if there was one person still waiting there to talk to him, he was going to wait till that last person was satisfied. And just talk to you like, oh, Bill, how you doing, man? As though he learned how to plug into people right away, as though he lived right next door to you.
But speaking of flicking lights, that's another example of what Les was all about. As he told us, his brother would walk into a room, flick a light switch, and say, oh, well, the light came on. Les would walk into a room, flick the light switch, and say, okay, now what made that happen? What was the process that caused this switch to energize something else, that then energized something else, and now we have light in this room? How did this happen?
So his brother thought he was a nutcase for that reason.
I'm sure his brother wasn't the only one for a while.
His mother was so supportive of him. She was the most important person in his life because she's the one that said, take our telephone and tear it apart. Take the flywheel off the Cadillac if you need it. Whatever you need, son. Because she realized he was truly a genius as a child.
We're talking to Steve King and Johnnie Putnam. This is a lot of fun. And you guys are going to be in Kankakee on Thursday night to talk about this amazing book a little more or less. What has the reaction been like so far?
We have been absolutely floored with the reaction. We thought there was an audience there. We didn't realize how much of an audience there was for this. People want to hear about Les. People want to hear his stories. And one of the things that we were very adamant about, and one of the reasons why we went with the publisher that we went with, we wanted a book that would present Les's words the way he said them.
In his own words. So when we transcribed his interviews, we didn't cut it, sweeten it up, edit it in any way. It's exactly the way it occurred on the air. And Bill, invariably, every time we had him on the air, we would get email and phone calls from people saying, oh, I tuned in halfway through or I missed the whole interview. You've got to write the book. So we dedicate the book to the listeners who told us for 18 years, you've got to write the book. So we did it, finally.
And we did it with the help of the Les Paul Foundation. And we have some photographs in the book that came from the Les Paul Foundation and from Les's personal photographer, Chris Lenz.
Including the picture on the cover of the book, Bill. That was Les's favorite picture of himself. And he was 94 in that picture.
Oh, goodness. And he looks really good.
Doesn't he look great?
Yeah. And he has that warmth to his eyes. And
yes.
It's just wonderful.
Because he's on stage there, so he was in his happy place. Mm-hmm. And you can't really tell here, but he's wearing a turtleneck. And that's one of my favorite stories about Les is he had over 200 turtlenecks in his wardrobe because as he aged, he said, I can color my hair, my teeth look good. As long as I wear a turtleneck, no one will ever know my age. I love that.
Yeah, it's good advice.
Yes.
If I can throw in one other quick thing.
We've got all sorts of time. These are great stories. Go ahead.
Well, one of the many reasons that we wrote the book, it's not just that we admire Les and his musical ability. A lot of people don't know how many things Les overcame. I'll give you just a snapshot.
Sure.
He had quintuple bypass. He had 2 hearing aids. He had crippling arthritis, and his elbow was absolutely shattered after an accident in the 50s. He woke up in the hospital, and one of the doctors was saying, we're going to have to take your arm off.
Oh my goodness.
Fortunately, there was another doctor there that said, no, he kind of needs it, but we're going to be able to fix it only in one position, so he would never be able to move his arm because of the way his elbow was
away from his body.
Okay. So he said, okay, take my index finger and point it at my belly button. And they said, why? And think about this. Just take your right hand, point your index finger at your belly button. Now, he could still move his wrist. He could still play a guitar.
So they would slide a guitar under his arm, and he would just rest his frozen arm on top of the guitar, and he could move his hand to play, which is amazing.
And he retaught himself how to play guitar. I mean, he never looked at something as, oh, this is a horrible thing that happened to poor me. It was all, oh, that's an interesting problem. Now, how do I overcome that?
In fact, when he passed away, Bill, he was working with Shure Microphones on developing a new and improved hearing aid because he knew what he needed for this great hearing, And we were with him at his sound check at the Ryman Auditorium. He did not know we were in the audience. And even with 2 hearing aids, that man knew exactly what he wanted to hear. He knew what his sound, and he would tell the sound guy up a little, down a little, more bass. And when they would do it, we'd look at each other and go, oh, my gosh, he's right. He hears it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I would imagine that since the book has come out and since people have started sharing more with you and you're talking about it, people must be coming out of the woodwork to share even more of their Les Paul stories.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the fun thing, too, because we meet people when we're out doing book signings, and they grew up with this music. And it's, holds a very special place in their heart. Or they are musicians. Or their kids want a Les Paul guitar, and they went and priced them and realized, no, I've got to wait till my kid gets a job, So it's interesting, the familiarity with him, it varies, and it crosses all age groups, and that's part of the fun of going out and meeting people and talking about the book and sharing his stories, is meeting these people from all different ages.
But speaking of people sharing stories, if I can turn on the blatant plug light for a second, along with the things that we wrote in the book, the foreword to the book is by Grammy winner and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame member Duane Eddy. We have personal memories from people like Charlie Daniels and Tommy Emmanuel and Doyle Dykes and some great guitar players, just people who wanted to share their stories about Les. And I will also add, because our publishers will slap us if we don't, that you can get the book at alittlemoreless.com. And
that's Les with one S, of course. So alittlemoreless.com.
Well,
and, of course, we will have books with us on Thursday night to autograph. And if you are not comfortable with the Internet, you can call 312-496-3677.
And, of course, you can come Thursday night, and you'll have books for sale there. The library staff will be helping out with that. But just to share with you what I think is great about having the two of you come and talk about Les Paul here in Kankakee is that as I travel around town, as you see, the office buildings downtown, in the elevator, there's a flyer for a little more Les. There's something inside the library. But then if you go to a local watering hole where they'll have music on the weekends, there's posters there as well, letting that, it's kind of a neat thing that it really does. If you're into music, if you are familiar with the two of you as Chicago radio icons that people know from years of being on the air, and these stories resonate with everyone.
Are we going to get to meet you Thursday night?
Oh, I'll be there Thursday night.
Yay,
of course,
great,
yes.
terrific.
It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be a lot of fun. So.
Well, thanks to Kankakee for letting people know that we're coming to town. It's so funny because we drive back and forth to Florida all the time. In fact, there's a whole chapter in the book about driving to Florida with Les on the phone. Because he would call when we would drive to Florida. And I won't take any of the fun away because it's a goofy chapter. But we'd often say, well, Kankakee is where we stop. It's our last stop before we get to Chicago. So now we get to really spend some time in Kankakee.
Yeah, and
in fact, one of our engineers at WGN Radio, Adam Phillips, lives in Kankakee.
Of course. And you have I know, a lot of fans here in Kankakee, and when, of course, they're not tuned in right here to WKAN.
Yes.
They were listening to you in the overnight. So thank you so much for making the trip on Thursday, and it's at 7 o'clock. Steve and Johnny talking about a little more Les. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks,
We'll
Bill.
look forward to meeting you Thursday.
Take care.